Hello, everyone. Good evening. I am Ebony Vaughn, and I am coming by way of Vaughn Therapeutic Systems. I hope that you guys have had an amazing day. Today, I just wanted to come, just to provide some support and encouragement to all of you who may have children in school, whether it is elementary, middle, high, or college. I just wanted to talk a little bit about where we are as it relates to the school system, and when I say where we are as it relates to the school system, I'm really just talking about children and some of the things that I've been seeing as a mental health professional with students in the school system. You know, what I am talking about today has everything to do and is based on my over 20 something years of experience working in the mental health field and working with children, youth, young adults, as well as adults. Everything that I talk about tonight, it is not a reflection of any other institution other than Vaughn Therapeutic Systems. I do not speak for anyone other than Ebony Vaughn of Vaughn Therapeutic Systems. And I want to say that because I work for a public school system and I am by no means anyone's spokesperson other than Vaughn Therapeutic System. So it is important for me to say that. So, as I just stated, being in this profession for as long as I have, it has afforded me the opportunity to work with some amazing young people. And right now, I am speaking from the experience of a clinician in a public school and also in higher ed. And so I have definitely been really, looking from a mental health perspective, looking at the state of some of our young people on all levels, again, as I stated. And I have to say that returning into a school building after 17 months of quarantine and actually seeing and working with our students, whether it's on an elementary, middle, high, or college level, it has to be one of the hardest things that many of us who work in these systems has faced for many years. And, mental health is something that is truly in the forefront and a challenge when we talk about our young people. And so tonight, I just want to give some practical strategies to parents and all those who either have children in school or of children in school. It is so important that not only do we tune in to the mental health of our children, but we also help to equip them and prepare them. Now, as a parent, as parents, we don't always know what's going on with our children, right? Our children don't always communicate, especially teenagers, or even tweens. They don't always communicate where they are spiritually or mentally or emotionally. And oftentimes they spend more time with their friends or on their phones or social media or wherever that is. But my encouragement to all parents, my encouragement to all aunties and uncles and grandparents is to really tune in and check in with where your youth are or your young adult are right now. It is tremendously challenging, when you think about returning to a school building with, anywhere between 200 and 1,000 students in a building. And kids walking around with masks and being in crowded rooms and crowded hallways on crowded campuses and feeling the pressure of getting back to normal, quote unquote. A lot of our young people have been home for a tremendous amount of time, which it has impacted them socially and emotionally and mentally. And one of the things that we are learning more and more is that it's almost like our students, from a social, mental, and emotional standpoint, are 2 years behind, right? Because they've been out for 2 school years, well, 1.5 school years, because schools closed officially on March, I think it was like March the 12th, 2020. And so technically they missed that last 2 quarters. And then, of course, they missed a full school year where they were online. And of course, a lot of our amazing teachers all over this world kind of jumped in and did this whole virtual thing. But the truth be told, our children still lacked the adequate academic experience that is needed for their growth and development. And so, a lot of times, what people don't understand is, although our children, our young adults, have grown in age as it relates to social awareness, as it relates to social aptitude and experience, guess what? They're kind of behind. And so what's happening all over, I'm in the state of Maryland. What's happening all over the state of Maryland is that many of our kids, even if they had struggles with mental health issues in the past, we are at a place where it is heightening now. Why? Because they're returning to the building and they're adjusting to being in school all day. They're adjusting to the deficits that they've experienced, while also trying to throttle ahead with the with the academics that they're learning now. And so there's a lot of things going on. And from a mental health perspective, there are significant challenges. So the first thing I talked about is just, making sure that as a parent, as an auntie, as a family member, a guardian, that you are checking in regularly with your young people. I think one of the most important things to understand is that if it's not your child or the person that's close to you, if it's not their mental health that's challenging, then maybe it's someone next to them in school that may be experiencing a mental health crisis or a crisis in adjustment as it relates to returning into the building. And so not only should we be checking in with those that we love and those that are close to us, but we should also be helping them to demonstrate compassion and empathy and be aware that everyone is not on the same level that they may be on. So, it's not business as usual. It's not school as usual. So it's important for you to really prepare your young person to be empathetic to those around them and to really not take for granted that it is school as usual. The other thing that I want you, to really begin to do is be aware of social media. Be aware of the time that your young people are spending on social media and what they're looking at on social media. Now, you might say, well, this is what we should be doing always. And you're absolutely correct. But I have to say it again. We are in a heightened state as it relates to mental health and adjusting, to the school environment. And so, so these are things that you want to just you want to keep a monitor on. There is an increase in violence in our schools now. Our children are on edge. They are struggling to adjust, and it is, triggering a lot of defiance. It's triggering a great deal of disruptions in our schools, right? And so, and this is just not from my experience, but people who I am talking to all over the state, okay, in different secondary schools or elementary schools or colleges all over. These are some of the things that our students are facing. They are tremendously overwhelmed. Why? Because there is an adjustment period. So then another thing that I want to talk about is, just as you are adjusting to your children or your young adults being back in school, you need to allow them to adjust. You want to check on them. You want to check on their work. You want to and make sure that they're keeping up and they're doing what's necessary in order to pass or in order to stay present in school. So this requires you being present with, present and communicating and talking with your students. Don't take for granted that they're okay, and just because they are A students, or just because they usually are very independent, don't take for granted that checking in isn't necessary, because it is. When you talk about adjustment, and I do want to kind of clarify what, because I keep using the word adjustment, and I want to clarify that, in the mental health world, there is a diagnosis, or there is oftentimes a challenge that we have, children or adults, where we are adjusting to transition. And so in that adjustment phase, you could experience depression, you can experience anxiety, you can experience a level of a heightened sense of awareness, or a heightened, just presence of irritability and mood swings and all of those things. And so you want to watch out for that too. A lot of our students, although they were virtual, they didn't have to move they didn't have to move in a building. They didn't have to navigate so many of their peers around them for an entire year, and then for half of a school year. And so what's happening? They have to adjust to that process. So I talked about how there is an increase in violence in many of our schools, where kids, some of them who already have mental health challenges, or maybe struggles with anger and aggression, they were in the house. They didn't have the stimulation that they have now. So keep in mind that not only is there a heightened sense of awareness with many of our students, but it's also like they got some energy and some adrenaline to let out. And so that is resulting in a whole lot of arguments and physical aggression in our schools. And so it's important for us to talk to those students that we are close to, that we parent, those young people that we know, really to encourage them, to work with them with conflict resolution, to work with them to really gain a better handle of their feelings and their emotions. When you think about our younger kids, this is probably a more difficult experience for our younger kids, because for the most part, maybe they were home with mom, or maybe they were home with dad or grandmom or whoever. And the reality is now they have all of these people around us. And then you're talking about, not it's post-COVID quarantine, but we are still dealing with, cases of COVID. We're still dealing with the fear of having COVID and what that looks like, and how that can ostracize a kid, within a system. And when you talk about being in a room with 20 and 30 people, and darn it, if someone coughs or if someone sneezes or has a runny nose, then people are on alert, like what's going on, and does this person have COVID, and get away from me, and so there are a lot of things that can trigger escalation with our younger kids and even with our older kids. And so it's important for us to continue to be, to talk with our children, talk with our young people, even on the college campuses. We're still, on the college campuses, guess what? Courses are going on, degrees are still being obtained. And so there's work that needs to be done. Everybody's back on the campus. And so people are dealing with masks and dealing with rooms that may not be as big as they would like for them to be, and fear of contracting COVID and all of these things. And so we are in a heightened state at this point in many of your academic institutions. And so please don't take for granted that your child or that person close to you is okay, but check in. And so the other part, that as a clinician, one of the things that I am seeing more and more of now is that there's an increase in anxiety. And for those of you who follow me, you know that I always say that there is a diagnosis of generalized anxiety, but there is also an adjustment disorder that includes anxiety. And what does that mean? Triggering events can cause young people, adults, to become more anxious than not. And so the season, the state that we're in right now, it can really increase and heighten a child's anxiety, and it could cause them to, or trigger in them. When anxiety is present, fear is present, right? And so what happens is when a child is anxious, or it triggers other emotions, it triggers negative behaviors, it triggers a sense of sensitivity that oftentimes leads to more arguing, it leads to increased conflict. And so it's important for us to see that as well. I'm going to tell you a story. I had a young person who told me they were glad to get in school because they wanted to hit somebody. Okay, so you have some young people that may struggle with anger and aggression, and when they were home, they didn't have anybody to fight, they didn't have anybody to instigate an altercation or conflict with, right? Whether verbal or physical. So what do you think is going to happen when they go into this building with all of these kids? It's almost like they're on edge, ready for some smoke. Why? Because they haven't had it for 15 months. So when you think about how anxiety can often trigger other emotions, this in anxiety can also trigger conflict. These are things that I want you to begin to look forward to. Now, I'm not saying that that anxiety triggers anger, but that's just another emotion that I wanted to bring up, and an example of a kid who definitely had aggression issues before the pandemic, and being home and not being in the presence of kids and things like that. Now he's around all these kids and he's on edge and ready to fight. But then I'm talking about that child that may experience a heightened level of anxiety. And the other part to it is for those that have social anxieties, being home for a year and then now re-entering into this school community, there is a level of discomfort that comes with that. There is a level of anxiety that comes from mixing in to this new school community. If you have a sixth grader, think about it. that sixth grader, when they left school March 2020, March 20th, March the 12th, 2020, guess what? They were a fourth grader. They were still a fourth grader. Now they're entering into this big old bad old middle school world, right? Which I think is like one of the three of the hardest years of our entire school career. But here's the deal: they are entering. They left school, right? In the pandemic, they left school as an elementary student. Now they are returning, and guess what? They're a middle school kid. And so that is a shock, which can also trigger anxiety. And so when you think about middle school kids, they're still trying to they're now trying to formulate their identity. They're trying to blend in with the people around them. But guess what if they went to a new school and don't know the people around them? So what's going on? Not only is it the adjustment of being in a new school, but it's also the anxiety that comes from pandemic and what that looks like, or post quarantine, not post pandemic, because I declare that we are still in that state of really dealing with contracting COVID. So all of these things are really, really, really important, and we need to tend to them as it relates to working with our young people. And as parents, you have to check in. When we don't check in, guys, guess what? Sometimes our children, our family members are just as lost as they want to be. But guess what? Because they're not talking about it or talking to anyone, it oftentimes is something that is not always as prevalent as we want it to be. And that's why I'm saying check in, check in, check in. Make sure that you are checking in. Okay. The other thing that I want to talk about is, so I talked about how our kids left 2020, entered into 2020, entered into school year 2021. Now they're middle school kids. But guess what? Let's go even further and think about that kid who was in the seventh grade in March of 2019. Well, March of 2020. Now they're in high school. So they not only do they have to deal with re-entering the school building, but now they're a high schooler with, a whole bunch of other things that, we have going on. And so it's important for us to really begin to see just how this is impacting our families. And I'm going to say our families because it's impacting all of us. No one is exempt from this. And it's important for us to see that. And so, we talked about the elementary going to middle school, and the middle school going to high school. But guess what? There were a lot of high schoolers that, maybe they were in the 11th grade. And so now they are freshmen in college, or maybe they're sophomores and just getting on the campus. All of these things we have to be very, very careful about. And one of the things about college students that a lot of times we don't know is that when our children go away to college, and it's like, oh, a lot of times they're looking forward to having fun and becoming a part of the campus and the community of the college that they attend. But guess what? The first year, between the first and beginning of the second year of college, that is by far one of the most likely college years that a person, that a young adult would struggle with depression and anxiety. Why? Because they're away from their family. Even though they wanted to be away from their family, they oftentimes struggle with that loneliness and not being in a household full of their family and full of their friends. And then on top of that, you have this COVID season where it is a tremendous aspect of isolation, and so some of our young people ain't even thinking about COVID and they just all gathering, but then there are others who are, and I have encountered a great number of young people in college that, there's an increased level of anxiety and depression, and it's centered around this COVID, this COVID crisis and how it has impacted them and affected them. So these are the things that I want you to work, I not want you to worry about, but I want you to check in with your students and your loved ones and your children. Don't take for granted that they love the fact that they are away and they're having a good time. Check in, check in. It is so important. And then the other thing that I am finding more and more, and I talked about how our kids are in a heightened sense of uncomfort, stability, or many of them are struggling with the adjustment period of re-entering the building, and they are adjusting to some of the increased level of aggression and violence that we're seeing in our schools. But I want you to also keep in mind that our teachers, our administrators are affected by this as well. So if our children are experiencing this mental health crisis, what do you think that means for the teachers who are responsible for teaching them 7 hours a day? Which brings me to my next tip and strategy. Check in with your students. Make sure that they are doing what they need to do in the classroom. Make sure that they are aligning themselves with their teachers and doing what is expected of them. I plead with you, parents, aunties, grandmothers, because guess what? It is not the children are experiencing this, and we're talking about this tonight, but our teachers and our administrators, they are also experiencing this, the challenges that that comes with struggling with mental health issues in a post-COVID quarantine season. And so it's important for us to keep in mind those teachers and those adults that are responsible for caring for your loved ones all day long. There has to be an increased level of compassion and empathy for all those that are involved. And I want to tell you something, and this was on the news the other day, and it's something that we have to be aware of. There is an increased amount of violence within in our parents, in the public school sectors, as it relates to maybe some of the stressors for children returning to school and what they're dealing with. And so it's not a walk in the park right now. And I think that we all, as a community, because we have our children, our nephews and nieces and grandchildren, we have to be present and we have to remain checking in with our loved ones so that we can support them and guide them and use wisdom to get them through this year. We can all talk about our political views and those views that we have about they shouldn't be in school. They should be in school. They shouldn't have to wear a mask. They should wear a mask. All of those things are, there's a tremendous amount of conflict with all of those things. But the reality is kids have to go to school and teachers teach them. That's their profession. That's what they chose. But because of the season that we're in, it's important for us to wrap our minds around the fact that every child is impacted in some form or another with mental health challenges in the season that we're in now. If it's not your child, it might be the child next to yours. And so there is a level of preparation. There is a level of guiding that we need to do with our children so that they can be aware and vigilant of, of the reality that they don't know what's going on, with the person sitting next to them. And so don't take for granted that they're in the same space headwise as they are. And so that's important for us to understand. So we talked about anxiety, we talked about depression, we talked about the importance of checking in, we talked about the importance of making sure that you are ensuring that your children are doing the right thing, that you are speaking with them constantly about being respectful and being mindful of the stressors that everyone in the school building has to have. The other thing is, don't delay seeking mental health support for your child. If you see or notice or have a thought that maybe your child is experiencing a challenge, my suggestion to you is to reach out to a school counselor, reach out to a therapist on your insurance, within your insurance provider directory. Get your child the support that they need. There are mentoring programs. Maybe you don't think counseling is what they need. Maybe connecting them with mentors or connecting them with services that will help bring enrichment and empowerment to them. These are all of the things that you really want to do. The other thing is, some of our parents are extremely anxious about their contracting COVID. And so oftentimes, because of that, you have a lot of dialogue, you have a lot of conversations with your kids or those that you're close to. And then your children bring that into the school. And so now, not only do you have a heightened sense of anxiety? Is my child going to catch COVID? Is my child going to catch COVID? Now you're projecting that on your child. Then your child comes and, has a kind of like a heightened sense of fear in the school building. And so we could have problems with that, right? Because when you talk about the school, when you're sending your kids to school, this whole 6 feet and kids need to be 6 feet, that's not happening in our school systems. And that's not, and not only is it not happening, but guess what? It's no longer a requirement in the schools, right? And as I stated before, everything that I talk about, it is based on my experience, my knowledge, and I am speaking on behalf of Vaughn Therapeutic Systems and no other institution. But the reality is, when it comes to our academic settings, to think that your child is going to remain 6 feet apart, away from other children in the building, it's really unrealistic, because there isn't enough square footage in a building for that to exist, right? And so we have to encourage our students to be as safe as they can. You want to encourage them to be as safe as they can. Wash their hands and make sure that they are keeping their mask over their noses. A lot of the students in schools all over this world, the struggle is them walking all day long and talking with their friends, and the mask just kind of comes down so their nose is not covered, and that can be unsafe. So these are the things that I'm encouraging you to encourage your students and those loved ones that you have that's in school. So you want to work on that anxiety that you have as a parent sending your child to school, so that you're not projecting that onto your children. But then you also want to encourage them to practice safe behaviors. You want to drill that into them. Practice safety, good safety habits as it relates to being in the school building. The other thing that I think is really, really important is to really monitor the tone of your children when they come home. You want to make sure that they're in a, the right frame of mind, that there isn't any anything going on that you don't know about. And this is probably what we would say, even if it wasn't post quarantine, right? Check in with your kids. That's a given. But I want to highlight it during this time because, again, it is such a crisis now. It is such a crisis as it relates to the challenges with mental health, with so many of our students. So these are the things that I wanted to talk about. I wanted to have a discussion on. If anyone has any questions, you can type them in. The other thing that is really, really, really important is really preparing your students for entering into these social spaces, right? So when I say social spaces, I mean you want to encourage and prepare them how to act in the lunchroom where it's a whole bunch of kids and they're on top of each other. What does that look like? Keep your mask up. Don't be so close in people's face while you're eating, because there can be an exchange of fluids. So these are the things that you're talking to your students about. Because here's the thing, when they're in large social settings and they're all kind of put together, oftentimes, they don't have any regard for contracting COVID. They're just being social and interacting with their friends. And so it's important for you to just, again, echo those safety standards, because only could it be a situation where they contract something, but then they could bring it home. So, and then it could impact the family. And then the other piece to it is that many of our students have friends and loved ones that have contracted COVID, and they may have even lost family members and friends to it. So you also want to monitor, maybe any grief that your student may be experiencing during this time. The other thing that I want to talk about is the media, right? And so we all watch the news. We're all on social media. So you hear about, oh, there's an outbreak in this school and there's an outbreak in that school, and all of these things we hear about. And I really want you to make sure that you are communicating with your school administrators. Don't believe the hype all the time. I believe that there's a level of sensationalism that's happening in our media platforms, and it's almost like I don't know what it's about. I'm not even going to go into any political things, but what I'm saying to you is, during this time, it's okay for you to ask questions. It's okay for you to call your school and talk to your school administrator, or talk to available people in your school. Get the real deal. A lot of times we see stuff on the news and we're like, oh, they're not doing what they're supposed to do, and oh, there's an outbreak in this school and they had to shut the whole school down, and it goes from one thing to the next. These things increase and heighten the anxiety of our children, right? And so if we are caught up in the sensationalism of media and what it says, and we then put this on our kids, they bring it to the school, and then guess what? There's a crisis, right? Whether it's just them being anxious, and then that triggering conflict with their peers and those around them. So all of these things are very important, and it's things that we have to really, really not only be accountable to as parents and as family members of students that returning, but we also just want to be watchful of and observant for. We need to support our children during this post COVID quarantine. And I specifically said post COVID quarantine because make no mistake about it, COVID is real and it's still out in these streets, guys. And so it's important, as I've been echoing time and time, again in this session, that, that they need to keep good, healthy safety practices. It needs to be in place. Okay. So we talked about the importance of you not waiting or delaying, but if you see a change in your child's behavior, in your young adult's behavior, recommend that they see a counselor. The great thing about most of our public school settings is they have counselors, whether community counselors or in school counselors. In your higher ed settings, you have a counseling department where you can go in and receive the counseling that you need, or that your child needs. So it's important for you to really get them the support that they need during this time and check in. And I talked about compassion and empathy and making sure that your students, are very try to be as empathetic as they age appropriately can. Does that make sense? Because a lot of teenagers, it's all about them, but you want to encourage that at home, that we are in a very difficult time and everyone is truly trying to adjust. The other thing that I want you to really be patient with, and I touched on it just a little bit in the very beginning, is to remember your children as it relates to being in an academic setting. It's almost like they are literally 2 years behind. Okay. Now, I'm not taking away from the virtual education experience that many of your children had. But when you think about a child going to school, when you think about the social ramifications for that, when you think about the growth development that they experience in a school building, when they're interacting with their peers, when they're interacting with their teachers, when they're interacting with their administrators, there is a level of growth that takes place. Okay, that has not happened for a year and a half. So when I look at some of the kids that I work with, it's almost like and I always say this, I'm looking at a sixth grader, but really they're in the fourth grade. And when I say that, I am not coming for your child, and I'm not saying that your child is not smart and intelligent. But what I am saying is from a growth and development standpoint, as it relates to the impact that an academic setting has on our children, they are behind there. And so when I experience the crisis that I experience with young people, I recognize that developmentally they're one place when there should be another. So we have to allow our children the grace to grow, to kind of catch up, right? If that makes sense. And that comes through them being in the school building, interacting with their peers socially, emotionally, and mentally, and giving them that period to learn and to quote unquote catch up. And that's something that as parents, we can support them with, as well as your educators are supporting them with. But it's something that it's real. It is real. Okay, so when you talk about from a developmental standpoint, there is a deficit with many of our kids, which explains some of the behaviors that we see. So when we see these behaviors, don't freak out, right? Because sometimes we freak out and we do things that are counterproductive. We do things that only make situations worse. So I'm not telling you how to parent and how to discipline your children, but what I'm saying to you is just to keep in mind the state that we're in developmentally, as well as within those institutions. Okay, even down to college. As an adjunct professor, being in the colleges, I see the maturity level of those that I work with. Developmentally, they are one place, but their age and where they are as it relates to what year they're in college is different. Okay. And it's because of that missed time. And, explain it whichever way you want to, but there is a deficit. And a lot of times we don't understand what that actually looks like. So it's important for us to really keep that in mind when we are interacting, with our, whether it's our children, our loved ones, whatever that is. And when you see that your children are struggling, check in. It's okay to call the school and see how they're doing, but support them mentally and emotionally. Everything is not about discipline. Sometimes we have to check in and see where they are emotionally and mentally. Another thing that I am noticing is for those children who struggle with ADHD or who struggle with attention deficit challenges. I am seeing a more heightened lack of concentration. Why? Because people are preoccupied with what's going on and what's not going on. Kids are on edge just as well as as teachers are, as administrators are. This thing is real, and so we have to make sure that we are checking in with them. We have to make sure that those of our students that are struggling with with ADHD, and maybe you are addressing that through medication. Make sure that they're taking their medication. Maybe you're addressing that through diet, through natural health products. Make sure they are doing that. They need that. If your children is on any form of supplement or medication to support their mental health, please, please, please give it to them. This is not the time for for us to be, well, they don't need it. They're fine. They just hyper a little bit. No, we're in a season where we need our students to be as supported as they can. And I'm gonna be clear about what I just said. I said if they're on medication, if they're on a form of medication, whether it's natural, whether it's a supplement, whatever it is that you're doing to treat your children, my recommendation is to be consistent and ensure that when they come to school, they are prepared. I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying go and get medication for your kids. It works for some and it doesn't for others. And that is a parental decision and not mine to suggest or to make. But there are proper supports out there for you to support your child. But again, get the support that you need. And if check in when it comes to homework and classwork and things like that, as educators understand that there are deficits, and I believe that there are things in place now to help address the academic deficits of our students. And so it's important for you to keep that in mind when you're checking their homework or when you are supporting them academically at home. Make sure that you are keeping in mind that there may be some deficits. And so maybe you are working with them at home, maybe shaving off some leisure time for them to read or for them to study or for them to spend more time doing their homework is something that's helpful, because again, they're catching up. And many of our students are rock stars, but then you have those that are experiencing challenges. So I'm talking about supporting your child's mental health post COVID quarantine. Okay. Another thing that we are seeing a lot of is, and I talked about that social anxiety piece where people have been alone for they've been in their homes in front of a computer for a great deal of time, and so now they're in the building, and guess what's happening? You have those that are struggling with social anxiety, so they are, taking a little bit more time adjusting, to the community. And then you have others that's just like wilding out. Why? Because they haven't been around their boys and they haven't been around their girls for a long time. So guess what's happening? It's a lot of disruptive behaviors, and people are not following instructions, and people want to talk when they should be doing their work, or they're running and playing and horse playing and doing all the stuff that kids do. But the reality is, not only are we in COVID season, but it's also about getting work done. And so that is an adjustment as well. And so instead of maybe coming down on them, just encouraging them daily to stay on task and to stay focused. Because guess what? At the end of the day, those report cards come out. Check in with your school systems, computerized grading system, so that you can keep a pulse, keep your hand on the pulse of your child's academic performance. Now, again, this don't have nothing to do with COVID, really, because we as parents, we should always be doing this. But I think it's important for us to monitor it even the more now, so that we can determine whether or not our students need more support or not, because it's really about supporting them and ensuring that they're getting what they need to match the deficits that they have experienced during this time. And so, there are so many things that I can talk about as it relates to supporting your young people, whether it's elementary, middle, high, or college. And I hope that I have addressed, some of those things. But, I really wanted to, the essence of what I wanted to share is just us having an understanding that this is not school as normal. This is not, we are not we are not back into the full routine of school. Some of our students are struggling, and they need mental health support. They need the mental health support of school staff. They need the mental health support of mental health professionals, and they need the mental health support of their family and their loved ones. And it is so important for us to check in. Do not take for granted that your child is okay because they're back in school. It is such an adjustment period for everyone. And I think that all of these things are very prevalent. And I don't care what district, what school, whether it's public, private, a lot of these things that I'm talking about, they apply to everyone. And some may say all of the things that you just said, Ebony, it should be that way anyway, whether it's post-COVID quarantine or not. And what I am suggesting is, I want you to step it up a notch, because it's real in these school streets. Listen, and for those of you who know what I'm talking about, it's real. And we need all hands on deck. We need the parents, we need everybody in the school, we need grandmama, grandpops, we need auntie, uncle, we need everybody to support our children and to make sure they are getting the assistance that they need. And lastly, I'm going to say, because I talked earlier about the importance of encouraging your children to be empathetic and sensitive to what their peers around them may be going through. And so, I'm not talking about your children getting into people's business, but what I am saying is, make sure you encourage them that you don't know what's going on around you, and you don't know what the person next to you dealing with. So don't start nothing, and just be respectful to others. Now, we're talking about middle schoolers, we're talking about elementary school kids, and that could be difficult for a lot of people. But I think that these are very real conversations, that we need to have in terms of encouraging our young people to be as empathetic as they can. Listen, I am Ebony Vaughn of Vaughn Therapeutic Systems. I have a practice. I've been in private practice since 2009. I work with all ages. I work with young people, um, in the school system as well as teaching. And so these are things that not only do I share from my current experience, but just from my overall mental health experience. I am truly about ensuring that our kids and adults are free to thrive emotionally, mentally, and also physically and developmentally. And in order for that to happen, we need all the adults supporting our students. Get the help that you need to support your child. God bless you and have an amazing school year with your child.